Hey guys, this is Blue Forest. I hope you're well. So today I wanted to start a video series where I'm going to be going through every bot, or nearly every bot, by class. I will look at their abilities, but more importantly, I want to highlight their strengths and their weaknesses to give you a bit more information, so hopefully you can make more informed decisions about who you want to rank up and who you want to use. I'm calling it the anti-tier list, and the reason I'm doing that is because I don't like tier lists and I find that they're generally unhelpful. This is for a few reasons, the main one being that they are very subjective. So, a player's preferences are always going to come into play when they are ranking bots from best to worst. And one thing you learn when you play this game for a while is that every bot is usable, and just about any bot can be really good in the right hands. And so rather than telling you that these bots are amazing and these other bots are terrible, I would rather do some objective analysis to just give you a little bit more information that might be helpful to you, because it does take a lot of resources to rank 5 and 6 bots, even more to forge them. And so you want to be deliberate about it. One thing I don't like to see is when people go on Discord, they're looking for guidance about who to use. People will usually just say, rank up this bot because he's better or because he does more damage. That's a very incomplete picture. A far more important question to ask yourself when you're thinking about who to use is, what do you want to use the bot for? So you have your own playstyle and preferences, which matters, but also what kind of fights are you going to use the bot in? Which lanes do you do in AMs? Do you want to do really difficult fights in LOC? What kind of mods will you be facing? What kind of synergies are you working with, right? So all of those things matter. And so you want to be careful and thoughtful when you decide who you're going to use a lot. So today we're going to start with the warrior class. I will make a video for every class, but this is going to be in depth. And so rather than making one very long video, I will do each video by class. So we'll start with the warriors. The one bot I am going to leave off is Dirge, and that's just because I don't have him and I don't want to make judgments about bots that I haven't used a fair amount. But with that said, let's just dive right in, and we'll start with Necro. So Necro is a very strong bot. He is really powerful. He does huge damage. He's big, he's bulky, he's very fun to play with, and a lot of experienced players do really enjoy using him. He's very focused on his overwhelming power and his SIG, which is related to overwhelming power. He's got a good SIG. For sure, it amplifies his damage. I will mention, though, that he is a Titan bot, which means that if you want to get him to high SIG, it's going to take a very long time. That's true of 5 stars in general, but particularly true for Titan bots. He doesn't need to be at high SIG for it to be effective, but if that's what you want, you will have to be patient. One thing I want to highlight about overwhelming power is that it's pretty easy to activate once you get to 20 charges, which usually doesn't take that long, but more importantly, you can keep it going for long stretches of your fight because it's not timed, and that's really helpful because it can seriously magnify his damage. He's got a few good defensive abilities, like his unstoppable chance when the opponent uses specials, but also his power rate down debuff, which is really nice. So when the opponent has more power than you, they will generate power up to 60% more slowly, depending on rank. And that is actually very noticeable, and it can be helpful in certain kinds of fights. His heavy and his special 2 are both pretty amazing. His special 2 is among the best in the game. As you probably know, his special 1 is the most difficult special in the game to dodge. And the AI also has a very hard time with that, so that can be useful. His bleeds are consistent. They're not the best bleeds in the game, but they can be replicated. They can be applied multiple times in a fight. And of course, he gets a lot of extra crit damage with those Titan charges, which can be maxed at 40 once he's awakened. And so he does have a lot going for him. I will say a few downsides. One is that he does take more melee damage when overwhelming power is active. You're obviously always trying to avoid being hit, but if you're using him in a tough fight like in AMs and he takes even a single melee combo, he could end up dead. And then 2 other downsides. Number 2 is that his anti-evade is actually pretty bad. So in theory, he has a 20% reduction on evasion, with melees, it's either broken or it just doesn't work well, so he's not a reliable anti-evade bot. And then also I should mention that his damage is inconsistent. So sometimes you play with him and he's going to be one of your strongest bots doing incredible damage. Other times he's pretty average. So he's not going to be awesome in every fight, but overall he's got a pretty reliable kit. He's got some unique abilities that other bots don't have. And he's also just really fun to play with. He's got some nice synergies with bots like Tronus, the Fallen, obviously Hand of Chaos and Seekers benefit him. So he fits well into a lot of different teams, and he's certainly worth a look. So that brings us to Bonecrusher. Bonecrusher is a bit of a dark horse. Very few people use him, and even if they do rank him up, they usually just put him on base. I got him very early on, so I ranked him up when I was a newer player, and he's actually not bad. He has some things going for him. His base damage is not amazing, but this is a character who's very focused on bleeds. It's a very simple kit, so you really want to use deep wounds with him. This is true if you're using a lot of warriors in general, but this is particularly true for Bonecrusher. He's got a very good sig because it activates often, and it's really simple and elegant, so when the opponent is bleeding, your attack and power rate go up, and theirs will go down by the same amount, so you can see that in action pretty often. He's got a nice heavy because it kind of comes out of nowhere, so sometimes it's tough for the opponent to dodge. His specials are all about the bleeds. You want to use his special 1 and 2 the most because they bleed most often. His special 3 has the longest bleed in the game, but it activates less often. I should certainly mention his defensive ability, which is the thing that makes him extremely annoying to fight against if you're not using a purifier, which is that he lands bleeds on the opponent when he himself is struck by melee crits, and it's a very good bleed. So this can actually be helpful for newer players or if your dodging game isn't very good, because sometimes when you get hit, the opponent will take more damage than you, and that's pretty nice. And I should also mention, he does actually have an anti-evade ability, which very few people even know about because nobody uses him. And it's actually decent. So when the opponent is bleeding, he triggers 25% fewer evades per stack of bleed. I have tested this against bots like Sideswipe, and it's actually not bad. It's not the greatest anti-evade, but I would say it does work and it's more reliable than Necro's. He's got a pretty good reach advantage with those claws of his, so sometimes even at a distance, he can make good contact with the opponent with his melees. Synergy-wise, he's not great because of the fact that he's focused on the movie Decepticons, but if you like to use Demotron, Barricade, Grinder, he does fit into that kind of team. So, like I said, he's not the strongest bot in the world, but if you like a fairly aggressive playstyle, if you like bleeds, he is worth a look, and I would say he's a bit underrated. So moving on to Drift. So Drift is a very popular warrior, maybe the most popular warrior. He's got a smooth play style. He's a little bit more fast-paced. He bleeds a lot, he crits a lot, he can do huge damage. It's also a fairly simple kit and easy to use, as long as you're a decent player. So the combo meter does factor into his kit. So if you're the kind of player that you're getting hit a lot, he might not be best for you, but for more experienced players, he can be really good. He's got a very solid sig. It's basically a glorified, better version of Deep Wounds. So if you pair it with Deep Wounds, you're going to see a lot of very strong and powerful bleeds, which is really nice. You have to remember, though, his sig only activates at 15 hits, so it's not so helpful in shorter fights, but it is really good in longer fights. And also, kind of like Starseeker, if you get hit after 15 hits, you will lose it, and you'll have to regain it. At 5 hits, he gets Focus and his Precision buff, which gives him his own anti-evade. I do need to mention his anti-evade is not perfect. It's decent, but it's not always going to work. I think that's just because there's no percentage chance given for his own anti-evasion. So sometimes when you use him, it'll seem to work really well, other times not so much. But it's not bad overall, and it will help you out sometimes. He gets a nice crit buff at 10 hits. And his specials, kind of like Bonecrusher, very focused on bleeds. You generally want to use his special 2 and 3 in longer fights because he has the 10-second epic bleeds. His special 1 is perfectly fine for shorter fights. So like I said, it's a pretty simple play style. You just want to do a lot of damage. You want to crit a lot. You want to bleed a lot. A lot of people do find him smooth. And I should also mention, synergy-wise, he is a Swordmaster's bot. And so if you like Windy, Bludgeon, Dinobot, that's one of the best synergies in the game. So like I said, if you're a pretty good player, you don't get hit too much, and you can keep those hit streaks at least decent, Drift is certainly a very viable choice. So moving on to Scorp. So Scorponok is a very interesting bot with a pretty unique kit. He's also really fun to play if you know how to use him. He has some tech-like characteristics. He's a bit odd that way. Scorp's kit is very much based on his Venom charges, his backfires, and his Dazed ability, which is unique to him. He's also got a very solid SIG because it allows him to heal, so he can repair a portion of damage taken with non-special attacks when he has Venom charges. It does not need to be very high SIG for it to be pretty good, and so healing is always helpful. But I want to focus on his Venom charges and his backfires. So as you may know, he gains a Venom charge for every bar of power, and they can be stacked up to 10. He gets a very nice attack boost for every Venom charge as well, and that can also be stacked, which is pretty awesome. And so his backfires are particularly fantastic in long fights because it does take time to stack those charges. But if you're able to do that and then land a backfire with a heavy or special 2, he can do some of the biggest damage in the game. I mean, I've seen him do well over 100k just in backfire damage alone. And even in shorter fights, so even if you only have a few stacks, he can still do serious damage. And another thing I should mention about his backfires is that they are very long, so they're 12 seconds, which is pretty good. But more importantly, when you use them, even if the opponent doesn't use a special, in most cases, they're still going to be penalized. Because if you have even a few charges that expire, they can become stunned. More importantly, they can take a huge hit in shock damage, which is just really fun to see. And so it makes his backfires extremely useful. You do need to lay off of his heavies. I should mention that. He has a great heavy, probably the best in the game along with Soundwave because it's so hard to dodge. But if you want to build up those backfires, once you have a bar of power, you do need to stay away from the heavy. But that's fine once you get the hang of using him. I do want to mention Dazed briefly. It's a very underrated and interesting defensive ability. So you use the special 1 and 3. And then the opponent will miss 60% of ranged shots and 100% of ranged specials, which is really awesome. That can be super useful against bots like Prowl. So some people will use Scorp specifically for ROTK, LOC2 for the Prowl fight, because if you have a hard time dodging his special 2, you just apply Dazed, and then when Prowl fires, the shots just blow right by you. So that can be quite helpful. I should mention he does not have any anti-evade at all, so he's not always going to be able to get out of trouble when you're fighting those really irritating evade bots. Using Unfazed is helpful with him in that sense. And then finally, he's a Beast Wars character, so obviously if you like those characters, synergy-wise, he's amazing. But even just as a standalone bot, he's actually quite good. So that brings us to Arcee. Arcee is a very fun character. I personally got her late. I wish I had gotten her earlier. But she's exciting. She's very fast-paced. She looks cool. She's got great animations. And her damage can really be ramped up. It takes a little bit of time to really see incredible damage with her. But given that she can use so many specials, it makes her not only fun to play, but she can seriously rack up that damage in the right hands. She's got a good SIG. She gets a really nice precision buff, gives her more crits, but also her own anti-evade. You are going to want to invest in her SIG if you want to use her, because you really want to get that precision chance up. At low SIG, it's not going to activate all that often. So if you want to use her in tough fights, you definitely want to feed her some SIGs. I definitely want to mention her power gain, because it is incredible, right? So Arcee can use more specials than just about any other bot. If you see gameplay videos of her, she will be doing special after special after special. It's really fun. It amplifies her damage, and that's because she gains a percentage of a power bar every time she crits, and she crits a lot. So that just makes her more exciting. You know, you can land special one after special one. It's really awesome and very useful and worthwhile. She's a very range-based fighter, so if you like the range bots, if you use, say, Starscream or Blaster or Shockwave, you know, she will fit right into your team, and that makes her really good, which is very nice. If you're good at sort of tripping up the opponent when they're dashing at you, you can land more headshots. She gets a nice range bonus on her special 1. Her special 2 will always bleed when it crits, and her special 3 will always bleed, period, because of headshots. And those are really fun, and you can definitely land a fair amount of them once you get the hang of her. I should mention that she is particularly fragile. So one thing about the warriors is that they are fragile in general. They're not a tanky class. For that reason, some people find them to be the weakest class. I'm not going to make that judgment, but Arcee certainly does not have high health. So you want to be a pretty good player with her, because if you're using her in difficult fights and she starts getting hit, she could definitely end up dead more quickly than a lot of other bots. But if you're a good player, she's another dark horse. A lot of people don't really bother with her, but she can be a serious beast if you know how to use her. So that brings us to Bludgeon. Bludgeon is not a well-liked bot. There are people who think he is the worst bot in the game. All I can say, as objectively as possible, is that he does have a lot of issues. The main one being that he's the most RNG-dependent bot in the game. So that means that his chance of activating his buffs, all of that stuff, is just not good. It's pretty low in most cases, which is very unfortunate. He is very much in need of a buff. If Kabam worked on him a little bit, he could be quite good. But as he is, he's just a pretty frustrating bot to play with. It's always a roll of the dice when you use him, because you just don't know what's going to happen. So if you look at his melee crits, for example, he can land a pretty awesome bleed with his melees. Unfortunately, though, it's only a 25% chance to activate. So that's a good example of the RNG working against him. His stuns, which are an important part of his kit. He has a very low chance to stun on his heavy and his special 2. He's got a decent armor buff, which makes him a bit tanky, and that's nice, but even that is less than a 50% chance, so it's not always going to activate when you want it to. So it's just a bit of a hassle playing with him, because you're relying on RNG, which you cannot control. You know, sometimes he's amazing. Sometimes his stuns and bleeds and crits come together, and he seems fantastic. But more often than not, that's just not going to happen. You know, so if you love him, by all means, rank him up. He is a Swordmaster's bot, but in general, most people are going to find that he doesn't deliver the best bang for your buck. I think if they do buff him, he would be very worth a look, but in his current form, most people are not going to find him to be very worthwhile. So that brings us to Hound. Hound may be even more hated than Bludgeon. I will say he's a very problematic bot. He has a very elaborate kit, but it's just way too complicated, and there are far too many moving parts, right? So he's a difficult bot to master. There is a lot to remember with him, and most people will find that he's just not worth the effort, that he's a hassle to play with. His SIG is partially broken, so he's got this ballerina roll that he does. He gets a little bit of a range boost, but it has issues because sometimes when he shows off and he does that roll, he ends up rolling right into the enemy's attack. I believe that Synthwave did a video about this some time ago. Obviously, that's irritating and shouldn't happen, but just more generally speaking, his kit is just all over the place. I did play with him as a 4-star early on, and I found him kind of difficult and frustrating. He's got these different kinds of ammo with Inferno and Precision, which is kind of cool, but you have to be able to toggle between them and know which ammo to use to give him the max benefit against certain bots in certain situations. Some of his buffs don't activate often, others do, but they're generally not that good. Like, he does have a guaranteed burn, but it's not a particularly strong burn. His critical resistance debuff should be good, but when you actually use it, it's just kind of okay. His precision ammo, he does have a bit of anti-evade, but it's not all that great. He has a couple of sort of unique and odd abilities, like he can purify days, but that's only useful against one bot. He can also nullify shields, but that's complicated because you have to be using precision ammo and is only on certain hits against certain bots. He has a guaranteed armor buff, but it's not a particularly good armor buff. He can bleed, but he often doesn't bleed, right? So there's just a lot to sort of wrap your head around with him. And like I said, most people just don't find him worthwhile because at the end of the day, his base damage is just pretty low. He's not a very strong bot, certainly weaker than most of the warriors. And so unless you are seriously invested in him, you're probably just going to find more benefit using other bots. He is also in need of a buff. But more than anything, I think Kabam should just simplify his kit, because even when he's buffed up, even when he's synergized, he has some good ones like sharpshooters and weapon specialists. He's generally just not that impressive. So finally, that takes us to Hot Rod. So Hot Rod is a specialist. As you may know, he is the king of anti-evades. Another thing about the warrior class, another criticism is that the anti-evasion is pretty weak for a lot of them, and that is true, but Hot Rod is the one exception. So it's a very simple kit. He is designed specifically for anti-evasion, and his kit is focused on acceleration and deceleration, so deceleration being his anti-evasion. It is very easy to trigger with ranged shots. You can trigger it over and over again in a fight. He gets some nice long periods of deceleration with a special 2 and 3. He can get some nice buffs and even stun with certain attacks when deceleration is active. So he's just very reliable when it comes to evade bots. He's popular in the right side of AMs, LOC bots that evade. I will say that there are issues with his deceleration against evade mods in AMs. It often doesn't work, but generally speaking though, when you're going up against like a scout, a scout B or sideswipe or barricade, he's going to finish the fight more cleanly than just about any other bot. I will say that his damage is not all that impressive usually. Some people find him a little bit frustrating because he generally will take longer to finish fights than other bots. And he also doesn't have DOT, he doesn't have bleeds, to kind of make up for that. But if you're okay with that, and you want an anti-evade bot, Hot Rod will be your guy. And he also has some good synergies with bots like Mirage. So he's a very particular bot, meant for very specific circumstances. But if that's what you're looking for, he's the bot that you want to go to. So that wraps up the warrior class. Like I said, once I eventually get Dirge and can actually play with him, I will share my thoughts. But I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. And I just want to finally say that if you're struggling with who to rank up and use, if you feel unsure, the best thing to do is take the bot into some very difficult fights. So bring them into LOC, use it against Mixmaster. This is why everybody tests their bots out against Mixmaster. Or bring them into a time slide and do the most difficult lane that you can do. You want to bring your bot into difficult fights and then just see how they feel, their play style, their mobility, their abilities. Do they feel good to you? Do they feel strong to you? Do they synergize with the other bots on your team? And if you do that, then you'll be much better off because you'll end up ranking up bots that you actually enjoy and that actually benefit you. So as I said, if you have any questions, let me know. I hope all of you are well, and I will see you all next time. Take care.